Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The webinar will begin in approximately 4 minutes. Thank you for joining us. The webinar will begin in approximately 4 minutes. Hello, everyone. Just to confirm, our webinar will begin in about 2 minutes. Hopefully you can hear me at this point. Please know that all of you are muted and will not be able to turn your video on during the course of this webinar. But thank you so much for joining us. And again, we will begin in about 2 minutes. We wanted to make sure that everybody can sign on to the webinar, get themselves settled, make sure that your audio is set up correctly. So we will begin very shortly here. Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. This is Interview Success. Know Yourself. My name is Kate Wingrove, and I am the Training and Development Director here with Toastmasters International. And I am so glad that you have all joined us today. We have a wonderful hour to spend with you, and we are so thankful that you've given us the gift of your time. This is the first webinar that we will be conducting over the course of the next 3 days. And so there are additional topics that we'll be covering tomorrow and the following day. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the webinar itself. There is a question and answer pane in your Zoom control panel. And so we do actually have a designated period at the end of this webinar where we will be taking your questions. We don't know that we'll be able to answer everybody's questions since there are so many of you joining us, but go ahead and do your go ahead and type your questions into that Q&A pane for us so we can collect them, and we'll do the best we can to answer them as we go or save them for that Q&A period at the end of the webinar. But we thank you in advance for your patience. Please know that if you have any specific questions about clubs in your area or things of that nature, we won't be able to address those specific questions, but we do have some information to share with you about how you can join if you're interested in joining. You may also use the chat pane, and I see that lots of people are already starting to use the chat pane. Thank you so much for that. It's really exciting to see that people are joining us from all around the world. Feel free to go ahead and continue using that chat feature during the course of the webinar, but please know that our team is going to be focused on the questions pane, and we will not be answering questions in that chat pane. We do ask that if you are engaging in the chat pane, that you are always polite and courteous to your fellow attendees. We are recording this webinar and we will be sending out a copy of the webinar in the post-webinar email. So you'll receive a link so that you can access this and watch it at a later date. And if you don't receive that email, please contact training@toastmasters.org. So let me tell you a little bit about the wonderful people that we're going to be spending our time with today. We have a fantastic group of experts. Our first is our moderator, Jennifer Blank. Jennifer has more than 27 years of career coaching, professional development, and communications experience. She currently directs professional development programming at a not-for-profit organization, and she serves as a freelance career coach. Her career development experience spans multiple organizations and countries, including establishing and providing strategic leadership for new career services programs at 2 international higher education institutions. Jennifer has lived in 3 countries. She's traveled widely and advised job seekers with diverse backgrounds on career planning and job search strategies. Jennifer has written a textbook chapter and more than 75 published articles and essays, including 34 articles for the Toastmaster magazine. She joined Toastmasters in 1995 and is currently a member of AAMC Toastmasters in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us today, Jennifer. We also have our panelist, Robert Vandermeer. Robert is a recruitment consultant at City 360 in Zwolle, the Netherlands. He recruits public enforcement officials for wow, my tongue is twisted today, municipalities. Robert also trains young professionals and students to be more confident when they pitch and present their ideas. He has an academic background in journalism and media studies, and he has extensive experience in sales and training. He has held several Toastmasters leadership positions. He's currently serving as Toastmasters Program Quality Director for District 59, leading volunteers in many countries in Europe. His current home club is Toastmasters Zwolle, the club that he helped to found in 2016. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Our third expert today is Paul Binkley. Paul has over 20 years of career services, student affairs, international development, and higher education management experience. As the executive director of the Center for Career and Professional Development at the University of Mary Washington in Virginia, United States, he is currently developing career readiness competencies into a liberal arts curriculum for the university. And prior to this role, he directed the student career development team at the Johns Hopkins University, managing a team of career coaches serving all undergraduate and graduate students. He holds a doctorate in higher education administration and has been recognized for his expertise in the area of federal careers. He has also worked in Afghanistan, Barbados, Iraq, Kosovo, and several other countries in Europe and Africa as an independent contractor and as an elections observer with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can focus in on our fantastic team here. Jennifer, I'm going to hand it over to you to take it away as our moderator.
Thank you so much, Kate, and welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here and to spend this hour with us. And I want to let you know a few things before we begin our conversation. This webinar series is modeled after the Master the Art of Interviewing article in this month's Toastmaster magazine. If you have not read that yet, I recommend you do so, and you can find it on the Toastmasters website in the magazine section. We believe that the steps in the article will help you strengthen your skills and either find a job better or find a better fit for you in another job. So we have thousands of people around the world joining us today, and our panelists, they are fantastic, but they're not going to know everything about every culture and every country. So if something doesn't quite feel right for where you are, that's okay. Honor what's the best fit for you. But I am confident that everyone will walk away with some great takeaways today. And if there's one thing, just one thing that you will take away, I hope that you hear and understand that the job search is a two-way street. So it's not just the employers who are making the decision, you do too. And knowing yourself is this essential first step for that process. So with that, I'm going to get our panelists talking with this first question. So let's talk about priorities, strengths, values, and interests that are relevant in our job search. How can identifying these things help us with our interviewing skills and finding a job or even a better job for us? I'm going to start with Paul.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. And thanks, Toastmasters, for hosting this. This is wonderful. I'm excited about it, especially this topic. I'm a big proponent of really understanding who we are and feeling comfortable we are and giving ourselves a lot of compassion and empathy, especially now with COVID. This is an unprecedented time and something that I would dare to say all, if not most of us, have never experienced before. And so I think it's important to give ourselves a lot of empathy and take the time to recognize that we're going through something completely new. And I think this is a good time to understand what our values are. And it's a good time to explore that, because when you understand who you are, you're making good choices. I think a lot of times people assume when you're looking for a job, when you're interviewing for a job, like you said at the top, Jennifer, it's all about them, but it's not. And so, a long time ago, I had a student who applied for about 4,500 jobs in a 9-month period. And that's crazy. I averaged about 30 jobs a day she was applying to. And she didn't want any of those. And when I talk to students, is that when you want to put together a good application, when you really want a job, you have to understand what that job is for you as well. And so understanding what your values are, your strengths in particular, are really important to know too. So I think it's probably it's the very first thing that we should be doing when we start looking for work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it starts at a very basic level as well. If I, for example, I can take the example of my fiance. She made a career switch from teaching to nursing. And if we look at a very basic level, how she found that out is she really valued working with people. And she still does. But she doesn't value working with her mind as much as with her hands. So when she made that discovery, she thought, okay, I like working with people. I like working to some degree with more expert knowledge than normal, but I really want to work with my hands and I really want to make a difference for individuals. Some people might find it very important to reach the biggest group as possible, but for her, it was just making that biggest impact on one person. So if you can extrapolate that to yourself, then really start by looking at the base of, okay, who am I? What makes me happy? Not just in your professional life, but especially in your personal life. How do you become happy? What do you do to pass the time? When was the last time you smiled? And from there on, building it up towards a career that really suits you and your interests and really makes you happy, because indeed, that's what it's all about, making a meaningful and happy career.
Yeah, I think starting with all of those, very fundamental questions then once we get to the jobs and applying for the jobs and even evaluating those jobs, then we have really essential information that we can use to evaluate those. And is it the right position? Just like Paul said with, the student who just applied to so many. I mean, then you're wasting your time, because if you didn't want those, why spend all that time when you could be really focused? So is there, to Robert, to go on what you were saying about, fulfillment, what types of questions might people need to ask themselves about this job fulfillment, and how are things changing given this kind of difficult time that the world is in right now?
I don't think that the current times really change the foundations as much, because in the end, we are going to come out of this, even if the new normal is going to be different than the way it used to be, but we're going to come back to some sort of normal. And if we look at the foundation of what makes us happy, what's some of the basic questions you can ask, and you can really start off by just looking at any kind of interest test to get yourself going. One example, one that was recommended to me was the Strengths Finder test. So the Strengths Finder test really helps you to discover, okay, for me, for example, I really like resolving things. When there are problems, I go in, I resolve them, and I'm happy, everyone's happy. I like to involve people. So I think it's something like a couple of dollars, and spending that on a test of that caliber really does help to discover, okay, what are my strengths? But even if you don't have the funds available to pay for a test, then there are plenty of online tests that you can take just to see, okay, where do I start? Just to get that inkling. And to top that off, the biggest one that I can hand to everyone listening right now is ask your friends. Sometimes we really over or underestimate our own strengths and weaknesses, and our friends often have a more objective view. So when you ask your friends, hey, what do you think that I'm good at? I've asked that to some of the people in leadership teams that I've worked with in Toastmasters, and I get a lot of good feedback that's really helped me think like, okay, that's something that I can do better. That's something that I excel at. And how can I process that in my career? So ask your friends.
I think Paul, I don't know if Paul is maybe frozen. I would add too that I think a lot of times in Toastmasters, there's a lot of speech evaluation. And so every prepared speech gets a written and oral evaluation. And part of that is to reaffirm our strengths and help us see where our challenges are. And so like what you're saying, Robert, to ask your friends is getting that feedback, right? Which is so essential, because too often we're so hard on ourselves and that we don't oftentimes recognize the many strengths that we have and how those could play out in a job search.
Maybe to follow up on that, to segue on that, don't be too hard on yourself is maybe another very good
I couldn't agree with
advice.
you guys more.
Oh, I think Paul is maybe back.
He's back. Floor is
So
yours,
Paul,
Paul.
Apologies about
I saw
that.
you shaking your head about the interest tests and getting that type of information.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the strengths is wonderful. I think a lot of times we tend to focus on our weaknesses. When you go to an interview, say, "Oh, this went bad, this went badly." Well, let's focus on what we did well, and just the fact that we got there. When you get an interview, the organization is saying, "We think you have the skills and abilities for this position," and now's your chance to really get in. So give yourself that credit. And the Strengths Finder is wonderful, and there are a lot of kind of free versions of this. And in fact, I'll tell a lot of everybody's in the U.S. at least. I'm assuming this happens quite a bit around the world too. Go to your alma maters. Go to your undergraduate universities and colleges. My office, for example, we have a number of assessments that we can give to you for free. that'll connect you to a lot of different stuff. Along with the Strengths Finder, I think Myers-Briggs is a great tool. I think the Strong Interest Inventory is wonderful. I think all that kind of stuff. Keeping in mind too that it's, these assessments aren't going to tell you exactly who you are. It's just going to give you a lot of good information and reinforce what you may know already. And also possibly tell you some new things too. And talking to your friends is great. I think if you can, honestly, I think 80% of opportunities that are out there are not posted anywhere online, and yet we spend 75 to 80% of our lives on this thing. It's all about talking to people. I think that's most important. The more people you talk to, especially ones who are doing things you think are cool, the better. And you kind of start to practice that interaction. I think it's really important to have that safe space to start with, but then talk to people who are doing really cool stuff. And when you're authentic and you're honest with who you are and why you're interested in what they do, it's really powerful.
I think that's so important to focus on those positives, because whenever I would be reviewing some job search materials for students or my clients, I could always tell when they didn't have that confidence. That letter, I could read it and instantly know. And I would say, you don't think you can get this. And so too often people you need to put that excitement out. You need to lead with your strengths because people can sense that. So let's talk a little bit. I know, Robert, you had talked about you really enjoy problem solving. And so that leads me into emotional intelligence. And we hear a lot about that and how important that is. So I want to break it down a little bit more because sometimes that can sound a little kind of lofty. What does this mean? But when we talk about emotional intelligence, we are talking about things like problem solving. We're talking about self-awareness, self-perception. We're talking about interpersonal relationships and empathy, all those different things. So what can people do to work on the different aspects of emotional intelligence, and how can that play out in the job search and interviewing process?
I think it all starts with taking a step back. And what we often do in our day-to-day lives, we get so caught up and we fly on autopilot. What you can do to develop your emotional intelligence is to take that step back and really consider, okay, I'm in this situation. How does that make me feel? How do I respond? Why do I respond the way that I do? And when you have that down, then you can start finding some patterns where, for example, in my personal experience, I'd like to describe myself as a bulldozer at times, where I just don't consider someone's inputs and I just go straight on ahead. And like with the 12-step program, the first step to solving a problem is knowing that you have a problem, acknowledging that you have a problem. So when you acknowledge, for example, a weakness like that, then you can take a step back and ask for feedback. Again, ask for feedback. I can't reiterate that enough, how important that is. And just be mindful of yourself. Okay, this is what I'm doing. So that's one way that you can develop your emotional intelligence and work with others on a better way. And the same goes for your strengths as well. Lean into your strengths so that people know, okay, for example, if you are a really likable person, but there are some other weaknesses, then lean in on that likability, for example.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those are really good points. And I think we put a lot of stress on ourselves to do perfectly every time, to get things right. And I know I keep coming back to this, but when you go in for an interview, the interviewers are there as much for you as you are for them. And so I happen to notice someone in the Q&A popped up where the comments like, teach us how to lie in an interview. You shouldn't have to lie in an interview. When you apply to a position and you know who you are, what you're interested in, you're there and you really want it. And so you're going to have answers to the questions like, why should we hire you? That kind of stuff. Avoid lying, be authentic. If it doesn't feel right, odds are it's not right. And when it doesn't feel right, then you're in touch with those emotions. Follow them, pay attention to them, ask really good questions, because when you really are interested in something, you're going to ask really good questions. If you're not really interested in something, then you probably are more likely to want to lie and kind of just tell people what they want to hear. It's a stressful situation, interviews are, for you and for them. So try to break the ice a little bit too. When you come in, and I've actually in interviews before, and I've talked to students about this, like come in and say, hey, I'll be honest with you, I'm really nervous about this because I'm really interested in this job. I'm going to be honest with you. And you know what? That levels the playing field. People tend to be a lot more kind of comfortable with who you are. And you don't have to have an answer immediately. You can take a breath. I mean, this isn't like, when I defended my dissertation where they were shooting questions at me and I'm supposed to know the answers, but that's not what this is. Give yourself the time and space to take a deep breath and be honest with them and be authentic. And so what you were talking about, Robert, with, hey, you've got to practice and know who you're talking to and be comfortable with what they are. Pick up on the nonverbal cues. You're going to get that. It takes just a lot of practice probably, but run with it and be kind to yourself and be kind to them.
If you look at what you just said, admitting that you're nervous, I can tell you if someone comes in with me with an interview and they start off by telling me how nervous they are, that tells me they really want this job. They're motivated. You're not nervous if you're thinking like, oh, no, I don't want this. You're nervous if you want it. So admitting that might even be a very good way to show how eager you are to get this.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more.
And I think, it's so important to be that authentic because, again, it goes back to the two-way street. You're not just sitting there thinking, I want them to like me, I want them to like me. I mean, of course, that's part of it. But you should also be sitting thinking about, is this the right fit for me? And if you're not your authentic self, I mean, your authentic professional self, obviously. But if you're not your authentic self, then you're not going to be honest with yourself. And even if you get that job, you probably won't stick around for a while. Maybe you won't even like it, right? And so you need to know yourself and be true to yourself for that. It also helps you ask, as Paul was saying, ask those really good questions because, people might not lie, but maybe they won't include certain things. You need to know, is this the right fit for me?
Another point to that too is they want you to do really well. Interviewers want you to do your best because they want to have a very difficult decision to make.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want to mess you up and kind of confuse you, all that kind of stuff. If there's a situation like that, odds are you probably don't want to work for that organization because they want the best person. And so I think a lot of times that helps. Like, they're not here to mess me up. They're here to actually learn who I am and get to know me. And I want to get to know them.
They have a gap to fill. I mean, if I have a job opening, that means that we're missing out on people. So if you are the right fit, then that's to our both's benefit. That's to the business benefit and to your benefit and to my benefit. So.
Right. And so you want to lean in with those strengths, show your excitement, show your interest, and go for it. Totally just go for it. But again, be your professional, authentic self and make sure if this is the right fit. I remember I interviewed for a position and it hit my top 2 priorities. And yet I realized the structure of it just would not be a fit. And I would probably be job searching again within maybe 6 months to a year. And that's not what I wanted. And so I waited a little bit longer and I ended up getting a job that I stayed at for almost 12 years. And that was a huge difference. So that it matters, to really think through, is this the right fit for me?
Absolutely.
So then,
go ahead, Jennifer. I'm sorry.
No, please.
I was just going to say, in this day and age, like right with COVID right now, I think I have a lot of students who are assuming that things have just completely shut down and no one is doing anything, which couldn't be farther from the truth. And so now I think is a really good time to be getting a lot of good practice with this. When you reach out to people like on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever in a professional sense, people have a fair amount more free time on their hands and they're looking for people to talk to. So I think now is a good time just to start reaching out to people and doing informational interviews. Those are a great way to talk to somebody, learn something, and do it in an environment, a situation that is very professional, cordial, and not anxiety producing in a lot of ways.
So let me, to perfect segue to bounce off of that, because there is a lot of anxiety right now,
Mhm.
and like you said, Paul, I think a lot of people think everything has stopped, and that's not the case. But in the same sense, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of stress. So how do people keep that confidence up, and maintain that? Find it maybe in some cases, or maintain it and keep getting out there. So any tips, any thoughts, Robert?
There's an Arabic phrase that I really love for this kind of occasion. It's called inshallah. Inshallah means God willing. And these days, a lot of people use inshallah for, we'll go to the movies, inshallah, and it's just like we'll see. But originally, inshallah is, I've tried my best, and now I'm putting this out to Allah. Now I'm putting this out to God. And I'm not a religious type per se, but what this means and how you can use this is just letting go. You've done your best. You've done your preparation. You know yourself. You followed all 3 of this webinar series. You've read the Toastmaster article. You've done everything you can. And then you ace the interview. Then it's time to let go. You've done everything you can. Everything else is outside of your circle of influence. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it wasn't meant for you. Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end.
And Paul?
Yeah, outstanding. Yeah, inshallah. Yeah, I love that phrase. I got to tell you too, I think a lot of times we assume we have to fix everything right now, and everybody else that we are following or watching on whatever social media platform, they're doing amazing stuff, and why not? You hear about these people who are learning a new language, or I'm going to teach myself guitar in this free time. You know what? Honestly, that's not for me. And so I think it's important for all of us to realize that we got to pay attention to who we are and the needs that we have, and be kind to ourselves and say, you know what? Today I'm just going to get up, get dressed, and I'm going to just maybe do one small thing, something that there's a lot of studies on neurology and the human brain and all that around the concept of chunking. Let's break these things into small pieces. When you look at, like, oh my God, I got to find a job, I got to change my life, I got to get through COVID, that's paralyzing. That's stress inducing. That's going to make it harder for you to get things done. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, Work Life by Adam Grant, I think his name is. This concept of everybody procrastinates at a certain point. You own it and recognize you're procrastinating. You're going to get it done. You're going to do it. And I think, Robert, one thing that you said about how it's going to be okay. It's going to work out. The big questions in life have a way of working themselves out. But especially when you can break them into smaller pieces. I think that's critical. I had a friend a long time ago who said, Paul, I got to change my life. Like right now, overnight, I got to change my life. And I said, wait a minute. That's too much. I said, what's one small thing you can do? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, do you like going to the gym? He said, no, I hate it. I said, well, then stop going to the gym. That's an accomplishment. Break it into small parts and reward yourself. Kind of say, you know what, good work. I improved myself. And so I think building that confidence in the sense that you are, something my friend of mine likes to say, you are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. NCRW. All of us are that. Recognize that and honor it.
I think those small wins are so important. I have been in a couple of really difficult job environments, and I remember the very first one, I would call it toxic, and it was really, it just kind of beat me down. And what I decided to do was take it one accomplishment a day, and as long as I did one thing to further my job search, then that was a huge win. Now, there were some days definitely that I did more, right? But if I just did one thing a day, and it's amazing, but one thing a day can really make a difference. And it feels doable. Like you were saying earlier, Paul, like sometimes it can just be overwhelming and we're paralyzed with everything that's going on. But if you just really say, okay, today I'm gonna, look for jobs on Indeed. Tomorrow I will rework my resume. I'm gonna shift it to this field instead. That third day, I'm gonna do something, maybe I'll take an interest inventory. But really, look at those small wins, and that really builds up to something so much bigger.
Right, and you know, sometimes it's just, you know what, I'm gonna send a quick text to my good friend Jennifer just to kind of say, hey, and what's going on, and kind of get that social interaction. You know, I prefer using the term distant socializing as opposed to social distancing, simply because I think we are social animals and we got to do it. And by the way, just to make sure, the NCRW, what I said was, all of us are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. So just putting it up again, someone's asking for me to repeat that. But yeah, break it to small bits, small wins. I think I couldn't agree more.
So let's segue a little bit into the resume, right? Because that is, or CV, wherever you are. And that's such an important piece of it, whether it's, you know, something we submit with an application, whether it's something we have up on LinkedIn, you know, but I have been in sessions where I've been doing a resume or CV review, and it's been amazing what I could dig up, right? What people aren't including in their CV because they think, oh, well, I only did it once, or it's not my full-time paid position, you know, but there's so much there that people aren't giving them the credit for. So let's talk about that a little bit. How does that resume or the resume preparation fit in with knowing yourself and getting ready for a job search? I'm going to start with Robert.
Well, one very fun example I can imagine in this situation is there's this online multiplayer game called World of Warcraft, and maybe some of you know it. And World of Warcraft has this feature that's called a guild. And a guild is a group of people that play the game together. They participate in activities together. And a guild also needs a guild leader. Now, the interesting thing there is if you're a guild leader, then you might be playing a game, but you're exercising your leadership skills. You're not in a paid position, you're playing a game, but you're still exercising some kind of capabilities beyond what's on your CV. And the trick there is, how do you sell that? So the trick is to consider, okay, I've developed my leadership capabilities by participating in online activities. Sometimes I do agree that, especially in situations where people don't know the whole gist of a situation, for example, here in the Netherlands, Toastmasters isn't that known. So if I talk about Toastmasters, then people first talk like, what are you doing with a brand of toasters? But if you first explain like, okay, this is concretely what I'm doing, and then you can discuss that in the interview, then you win points, because then you're setting yourself out from the crowd and you're really making yourself unique. So looking at that, looking at those extracurricular activities, even if they might be a little bit out of the blue, consider that.
And Paul.
You know, I think this being an international call really kind of gives me a kind of metaphor to use, because, you know, when an employer posts a position, basically what they're saying is, we have a problem. And your job with your resume is to say, I'm the solution to that problem. But here's the key. You have to do it in their language. So for example, if I were applying to something in Germany and I sent my resume in English, no, they're not even going to consider me. Why? First of all, they would say he didn't even bother to translate his resume. And second of all, we can't read it. We don't understand it. Most people in Germany speak English, but you get my point. And so that requires that you understand really what you can do, all the skills that you have and the experiences, abilities and such, so then you can translate that information into what the employer has told you. So in the job description, they're going to tell you, we need you to do these, this skill, and you're going to work with this type of person, this type of machinery, and this kind of methodology, what have you. You need to take your information and translate it. Now, I'm not saying that you lie. What I'm saying is, for example, in my job, you know, I coach a lot of students. And so if an employer that I'm applying to says that we want you to be counseling with students, I can change that language into their language. So they understand exactly, make it easy for them to understand how what you've done fits with the position you're applying to. I can't tell you how many times I've read through resumes of really impressive people who would be perfect, I think, for the job that I have available, but they haven't taken the time to tell me how their experiences have really relate to what I need, the employer. And so the resume is or CV is your first shot at telling them exactly that. If you don't take the time to do it, to translate it, I've got a stack of other resumes I got to get through. So make the effort to do that. And again, I want to emphasize the fact that you really have to know what you've done to do that. And so even if you think you've just worked in retail, well, there's a lot of great skills that come out of that. Customer service, managing time, managing people, managing inventory, accounting, software, all this stuff. Sometimes students will say to me, well, Paul, I did all this. I did it for somebody. I assisted them, whatever. I feel like I'm kind of lying on my resume because I'm kind of telling people what I've been doing. I said, you've been lying on your resume before this because you haven't been telling the employers all that you've done. And you've done a lot of really good stuff. The key is, though, really breaking what you did down into smaller parts and understanding the value you brought to that organization.
I think that's so important. So, language, using the language of the industry. And it also means, though, when you're leaving an industry, because a lot of people want to transition out, maybe go into something else, kind of, Robert, like you were saying, your fiance, and then taking that language out too, right? And so knowing the jargon or that language when you're moving into it, but then removing that. And that's where maybe, obviously career counselors, career coaches, even friends outside of the industry can help you. And so, Robert, I see you're shaking your head. I'm going to check in with you on this.
Yeah, well, one of the things, for example, the field that I work in right now, public enforcement, is a rather niche field. So one tip that I give potential candidates as well is talk to people on the street, talk to public enforcement officials on the street, and tell them, okay, what do you do and what kind of skills do you need, and really get a feel for, okay, what's in this industry. And then when you have a feel for what's in that industry, maybe you can even get them to read your CV or your resume and see if they can translate your CV to their language. Is it already in their language? Maybe some things need to be rewritten. Then that helps as well. Really know the field that you're applying for.
And that ties back to what Paul was saying about informational interviews. Exactly. It's just the same, take someone out for coffee. It doesn't have to be this formal thing, but really understand, would you understand the CV as I would put it to you, or are there questions? So Paul, I saw you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Robert. I think it's, again, it goes back to the more you talk to the people who are doing things that you think are really interesting and cool and all that, the better. Like with your fiance, there are connections between what she was doing and what she wants to do. There are skills that are fungible, that are kind of translatable, that are a thread that run throughout your kind of experiences, but you've got to tell that story in a way that, like you said, Jennifer, the industry will recognize it, and then that particular organization, and then that particular kind of hiring manager will understand. And, a lot of times people say to me, I apply for this stuff and my application just goes into a black hole. Well, that's because you're not connecting with people on the inside, if you can do that. That's because you don't really take the time to kind of understand exactly what they're looking for. The information is out there, and I think that the more people you talk to, the better.
And I think that's another source of confidence. I mean, I've seen it just wash over people's face when I have been reviewing their CV with them, and all of a sudden, I learn more and more, and I flesh out kind of what's, behind the words, the sparse words that I think, they use, and we bring that up, and then all of a sudden they realize, oh, I do have all these transferable skills, and I do have all this relevant experience, and that's beautiful to see. So, giving yourself credit for all that. And then when you see it on the CV, it just reinforces that.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's a great feeling to see that, and again, it just reinforces this idea of talking to people, because we are with ourselves 24/7, right? And so oftentimes we miss things that our friends, our colleagues and such will say, what do you mean you can do X? You've been doing that the whole time. So I think things pop up like that all the time, especially when you're talking to people. So the more you can, the better, I think.
Yeah.
I got into recruitment just because one friend just told me, hey, you're really good at connecting people. Why don't you get into recruitment?
Nice.
But there's one thing that I wanted to add, about that resume black hole. It's also to know the size of the business that you're applying for.
Right.
So for example, right now I'm at a medium-sized business with about 120 people at headquarters. That's a lot more of a personal application process than when you are applying to a giant tech company that gets thousands of resumes every day. So you really also have to know what size of business are you applying for? And I'm sure that we'll see more about that in the preparation webinar that we'll get tomorrow. Be sure to sign up for that one as well. But yeah, running ahead of the point, just be sure to know the business that you're applying for as well.
And I think, just not to kind of belabor the point, but I think it's really important. So like a lot of times people will say to me, Paul, you're really good at public speaking. You should, my family thought I should become a lawyer. Well, okay, yeah, I might be good at that skill, but if I don't enjoy it, if I don't really want to do it, it's going to suck a lot of energy from me. I'm not going to be in a comfortable position. So be honest with yourself and say, yeah, I might be good at that, but that's not really what I want to do. So that happens quite a bit. I think people assume that, well, I must be good. If I'm good at it, I should probably do it. Ask yourself those questions. Ask your friends those questions.
Yeah. I think that's so important too, like where as you're talking about, Paul, about like your energy, knowing yourself is also about recognizing, okay, I can do this, but wow, I get tired very quickly, or, now that so many of us are working from home, not everybody, but many of us are, I think some people are finding that that's a really good thing for them. And then some people are finding, oh, this is a struggle, right? And so understanding those types of job environments, the size of the organization, what you'll be doing, all of those things go into what we started about, the strengths, the values, the interests, the priorities, and understanding those so that it really is the right fit. So let's talk about we've got the CV and resume, and talk about kind of multiple CVs, or, we shouldn't just work with one, should we? I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to put it out to you guys. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, for me, you're always going to, every job you apply to, you're going to have a different resume. You're going to tweak it to fit exactly what you're applying to. A lot of people say, I need a general resume. I need to have something I can just pass out. Well, in all honesty, that's hard to do, but there is a way to do that, as a matter of fact. And so if you find a position that you think is really cool, that you really like, even if it is something that is maybe 10 years from now, something you're not qualified for right now, but you think is really, really where you want to go, write your resume for that job. And so when you share that resume with people that are in the field, they're going to recognize a lot of that language because you focused on that industry. But in all honesty, if you're sending out the same CV, resume to a whole bunch of different places, it's not going to work. You got to take that time to really focus in on what they want. And that means you got to take the time to put together a good application.
Great. And what you can do is, because then the question is, okay, different CVs for different businesses, but then how do you customize that? And that is really by looking at, okay, what kind of positions have you had in the past that really apply to the position that you're applying for, and then fleshing out the roles that you had that apply to the position that you're applying for, fleshing those out more, and then maybe minimizing the attention that you have, or maybe just putting in, I worked at blank for blank amount of time and it was in blank industry. And then really fleshing out the positions where it really mattered most. In the end, if people want to see your full CV, that's something that you can put on your LinkedIn. But the CV that you're going to put into the application form, that should be the CV. And that's something, I mean, if I look at myself, usually it takes about a couple seconds for me to decide, okay, is this someone that's really good? Is this someone that I'm going to give a shot, or is this a hard pass? So really make sure that, that resume pops. Don't do it through unconventional formats, because that just bugs out every automatic processing software. But just make sure that it pops by, for example, adding a picture of yourself, putting in, for example, what I had when I applied for this position was Robert Vandermeer, recruitment specialist. Just knowing that you've taken the time to specialize your CV, that already makes a lot of difference.
Mhm. Oh, so thank you. And I think that was just a perfect place. We've now see Kate has rejoined us. And so I think we're going to be moving into our question and answer. So wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. This was just amazing to listen to you have this fantastic conversation and share such wonderful information. We do have some time for our questions and answers now. So I'm going to go ahead and run through some of the ones that we've received. There have been a lot. Jennifer, the first question is for you. It is from Leroy, and Leroy is wondering, how do you relax during the interview to make sure that you're projecting friendliness and a good ability to get along with the people that you're going to be working with?
All right, well, Leroy and maybe others who may have had this question, so much of that is practice, right? Just like I do for my Toastmasters speeches, just like I do for whenever I interview, I practice. And I practice out loud, because it's amazing the difference of what I'm thinking in my head and then when it comes out of my mouth. Not always the smoothest. And so if I get that out and I know, and I don't want to memorize, to me but you do want to keep in mind the specifics behind things. And that's why we weren't able to get to this, but we want to think about kind of anecdotes or examples. So if you look at a job description, what are the key skills and experiences they're looking for? Where have you demonstrated those? Have those examples in mind, and then, and kind of practice those. Also, if you really are going in thinking that you're evaluating the opportunity just as much as they're evaluating you, that's going to help focus your energy, and you have less time to be nervous and more time to be really in that thinking about it and evaluating it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Jennifer. I want to kind of totally reemphasize the practice thing, and also I want to kind of, even before all that stuff, I think a lot of it is preparation in terms of, okay, let's do the research on the people let's look them up on LinkedIn who are going to be interviewing me if you know beforehand. Let's, honestly, let's do a dry run the day before of how do I get to the office that I'm going to. Let's make sure that all if I'm doing a Zoom interview, which is going to be a lot more prevalent nowadays, that I've got the right background, all these things. And when you're prepared, and then when you take that deep breath, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable, less nervous. At least you'll be prepared for the unexpected things. And I think that's critical. And know too that it's okay to be nervous. Like Robert said earlier, when you're nervous, that means that you really want it.
And I think I love, Paul, your point about looking up people. I mean, when I interview people, I look them up. When I am the person interviewing, I will, so either side, I look up who I'm going to be encountering, because then they become real, right? It's not this like overwhelming. And then you find that you oftentimes have a connection that you can bring up and instantly feel more comfortable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a good way for you to build rapport. There might be that connection, like, hey, I saw that you went to, Mallorca for a vacation. I've always wanted to go there, and go from there.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Robert, the next question is going to be for you. This is from Samuel. And Samuel is wondering, what do you think about elocution classes so that you can learn to speak more clearly? Is it worth spending your money on something like that?
Well, Samuel, that's a very good question. I would personally say that really depends on what impact you feel that it has on your interview process. If you believe that you would really benefit from an elocution class, even if it's just the the placebo effect. Even if it's just a placebo effect of, feeling more confident after having an elocution class, if that works for you, please do. But again, and like Jennifer stated as well, just as in Toastmasters, feedback matters. So if you think that elocution is something you need to work on, maybe ask your friends. is my elocution something that I need to work on?
And maybe join Toastmasters first and check that out.
There you go.
Just saying.
You know, and I think one thing to keep in mind too is there's the old adage, the more you take other people's advice, the more likely you're going to make other people's mistakes. You've got to take everything that we're telling you, everything you hear from everybody else. If it works for you, it works for you. So if you think you need an elocution class, then do it. If you don't think you need that, but you need something else, or if there's a particular way that you kind of calm down or prepare and it's working, if it's working, it's working.
Yep.
To close that off, in Dutch, the word for stubborn is eigenwijs. And eigenwijs means your own wisdom. So be stubborn, pursue your own wisdom, and if it works for you, like Paul said, if it works for you, it works.
Yeah, in the end, you always should trust your gut. You talk to people, you get all this great information, but in the end, does it feel right for you? Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You know, and just to really, I learned something the other day about how the part of the brain that deals with emotion and deals with kind of that side of it doesn't communicate well with our logic side, but it communicates well with our gut. And so that's how it communicates with us. When something doesn't feel right, it goes to the gut.
Oh,
Nice.
interesting.
Yeah.
I like that. All right, Paul. Next question is targeted towards you. This is from Maha. And Maha's wondering, how different is the interview preparation process in different parts of the world? Canada, the US, Europe, Asia. Like, are there lots and lots of differences in that process?
I'm going to default and say yes. You know, every culture, not every country, but every company, every division within certain companies, they're all going to have different ways of doing things. And so I think it's critical that you do the preparation and understand and feel like you understand a bit more ahead of time what to expect. You know, one of the things that Robert said earlier about a resume, you know, put a picture on your resume, that kind of stuff. In the US, you should never do that. Those little things, but that's fine. I mean, it's like, how would you know that unless you talk to someone, you know, so talk to people about that. Find out how the interview is going to go. You know, don't hesitate to ask if someone offers you an interview, say, what kind of interview is it going to be? What can I expect? Who's going to be there? Ask these questions. Be prepared. And so, yeah, every country is going to be a little bit different. I think generally speaking, the interview process is, you know, at a human level is the same. You're going to ask a lot of questions. We're trying to gauge fit, but it's not the perfect way to do it. So yeah, I think just being prepared for it, asking the right questions, feeling like you comfort, like you feel like you know what you need to know going into an interview is going to be critical.
We're going to get much more into that tomorrow with networking, but that's why if you can network with, you know, people in the field you're either in and you want to stay in or where you're going to, and then even network, you know, with people at that organization, because like Paul said, I mean, organizations handle it differently, you know, and then you want to know, are you going to get a case interview? Will you get a behavior-based interview? Are you going to, I mean, it's just, will there be a panel? Is it one-on-one? Will it be, there's so many differences. And so that's where you've got to do your research.
I heard that somebody told me the other day that part of their interview process was they were asked to make an omelet. They brought out eggs and had him make an omelet right there in the interview part. They wanted to see how he handled it.
But for a chef, not for a chef.
Not for a chef. It was for like an administrator kind of analysis position.
Interesting. Well, that's a totally different case. Go ahead,
if
Robert.
you take up a sales position, be prepared to pitch a pen. Every other sales position asks you to sell a pen.
Nice.
People
Well, and I
watch
was
too
going
many Wolf of Wall Street.
at one point I was interviewing for higher education, and I got a case interview. Now, it wasn't the same that you would get at a consulting firm, but I got a case. And so you can't assume one thing or another. That's why you really need to ask those questions.
So, and here's kind of a corollary to that too, is pay attention to the questions that they're asking you. That'll tell you a little bit about it. Like if they keep asking you, so how do you handle difficult bosses? How do you handle people who micromanage? If those questions come up a lot, you probably should pay attention to that.
Yeah, it is amazing what people will share with you if you take the time to say, and again, that goes back to knowing yourself and evaluating the job. It's you know, it's a two-way street. And so you want to be paying attention. What are they asking me? because what they're asking matters, and what they're not asking matters too, right? And so you need to be able to evaluate and step back later too and think about what just happened.
Wonderful. Thank you all. All right, I have another question. I'm going to target this one towards you, Jennifer. This is from John, and John is saying that earlier you mentioned the term professional authenticity, and John's wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So we were talking about being authentic, and you be you. I can have a very silly, sarcastic, or playful side. Maybe not what I want to bring out in an interview all the time, right? So that's what I was talking about, professional authenticity in terms of putting that best foot forward. So not to say that I shouldn't smile and hopefully be engaging and maybe make a little bit of a, not a joke, but have some humor because that's my style, but I shouldn't be, I wouldn't drop sarcasm right away. But maybe I'd be looking for where people are kind of fun and easygoing or things like that. So that's what I mean about the professional authenticity, that we need to put our most professional foot forward first. And hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, and for example, I know I have a terrible, terrible, terrible sense of humor. And what works for me there is just to dip your toe in the water in the interview process, maybe crack a bad joke, and then see how it goes. And if it's received well, you know that you can continue.
Right.
For now, I'm very much at home with my team, and I can crack jokes like that all the time. But yeah, dip your toe in the water first, and then see.
Right. I hope that helps, John.
I think we have time for maybe one more quick question. This is going to be from David, and Robert, I'm going to target this one towards you. David's curious about body language for virtual interviews and kind of how do we manage all that?
Well, David, that's a very good question. What I would say is that because often when you have a virtual interview, this is what you're going to see. But then you can still, you can lean in, you can lean back, there's still some ways to incorporate body language. But I think that the most important one to take into consideration is just pay attention to someone as you would during a normal interview. The only difference is that you have to multitask a bit between looking at the camera and looking at the screen. Because when you're addressing someone, look at the camera, and when they're addressing you, you look at the screen.
Yeah, I'm not as good about that. I should have been looking at that little camera dot more today, but it's hard not to see the faces. But I hopefully have balanced that. But we can all learn. Sorry, Paul, you were going to say.
Well, I think, yeah, totally. I mean, that's one of the great things about the virtual interview process is that when I'm looking at people in the eye, I'm looking at the camera. Looking at people in the eye can be uncomfortable, especially if we do it for far too long. But when you're looking at the camera, it doesn't come off that way, and it's easier for me. But I will also say there are some, some basic tips, like, don't do this, don't have the camera down there like this, have a decent background. I would say that, like, the background that Jennifer and Robert have right now and yours too, Kate, are fine. I wouldn't use a virtual.
He's getting caught up. Oh, I think he's getting caught up, but be careful about virtual backgrounds, basically.
Yep. Fantastic. All right.
When you roll with the problems, like, just own it.
There you go.
Rolling with the problems. There we go. All right.
I think that also, and it's in the comments now as well. Make sure that your internet connection is stable.
As best you can. I mean, we can't always handle that. And I think, again, professional authenticity is like, how do you roll with the punches, right? And how do you deal with those things? And if you can do it with humor and a smile and grace, that'll make a difference.
Yep.
Absolutely. We are at the end of our time now. I'm so sad that this wonderful hour has come to an end, but thank you everybody so much for joining us. I do want to show really quickly our final slides. So Jennifer did mention her article at different points throughout here. If you'd like to read Jennifer's article, Master the Art of Interviewing, you can see the link on the slide right now. If you'd like to find a Toastmasters Club near you, there's a link there for you as well. A huge, huge thank you to Jennifer, Robert, and Paul for spending this time with us. This has been such a wonderful experience, such a great way for me to start my day. I'm so pumped up and excited now. We really appreciate you sharing your insights with us and your time with us. And to all of our attendees, thank you to all of you as well for joining us. We will be sending you the recording soon, so feel free to keep an eye out for that. And you can send it to anyone that you think would benefit from the tips that were shared today. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.